Now, in this lesson, I'm going to introduce you to an onChange event in local storage. Now, this is a far lesser known API, but it essentially allows us to bind to our storage object and add an event listener and fire off a callback as soon as something changes. Now, firstly, what we're going to do is jump into our index and then go straight to the bottom, and we're going to add some code. So what I'm going to say is window add event listener. We can add an event listener called storage. Now, what this will allow us to do is run a function anytime our storage event has a change. However, there is one very crucial aspect involved, and that is this event only fires if we're on a different tab or have multiple tabs open. So this will essentially fire a storage object and allow us to, bind to it and then perhaps set the data across different tabs. So if you imagine the user has multiple tabs open and then changes something on one screen, our other tabs will also be notified about those changes. So to demonstrate this, let's log out our event listener and just see what we get, and then we'll talk through it. So what we can do is go ahead and open a new tab. This will then ask us, would you like a cookie? I can hit yes or no. Now, in this tab, we're then going to get this storage event listener, which is going to fire. It's not going to fire inside the tab which the event was executed. So here I'm going to click yes, and we see absolutely nothing in the console. If we go back to tab number 1, you can now see that we have this storage event. Now, this is quite nice because it's almost like a watcher. You can see that we have this old value of null because we do not have a previous value. And we also have this new value of true, which is of course a string because that's the default for local storage. There's lots of other things. You can see that we have this storage area with the cookies property of true, the webpack property with its silent value. But more importantly, we have this key. Now, this key is quite nice because it actually tells us what property in local storage was changed. So with that in mind, I thought it would be a good idea for us to add an onChange handler. So here we're going to say onChange. Now, instead of just passing in a function and then running a callback when something changes, which would look something like this, where we have window.eventListener, pass in our storage, take the event, and then inside the function, we could then run a callback and perhaps pass the event through, which would then involve taking the function as an argument down here. We could then go back to our index file and we could say local storage dot onChange, and we could then pass in a callback. So this is going to fire anytime our local storage actually changes. And we can grab this event object, which is exactly what this storage event object is here. So instead of having this onChange, what I thought it might be worth doing is detecting when our cookies does change. So here, as the first argument, I'm going to say, I want to know when an onChange event for our cookies actually fires. And then we're going to just pass the event object for that cookies. We could, of course, handle that logic in here, but it's quite a nice API to be able to just quickly say, I want to know when there's an onChange event for our cookies property inside our local storage. The reason I'm using local storage here is because this onChange event does not work with session storage. And that is because each session is tab dependent. Local storage doesn't matter how many tabs we have open. So this method will allow us to keep things in sync. So let's go ahead and say console.log, and we're going to log out that event. But before we do, let's jump into our storage, because at the moment we're simply passing our callback in and then invoking it anytime a storage event occurs. So to run this on the actual key that we want, because we passed in the key here that we want, we can essentially say, give me the key, and then we're going to check the key. If the keys match, then we're going to invoke our function. So if the key, such as cookies, equals the event.key, because remember this is that key inside of here. So if cookies in our case equals cookies, then we can go ahead and invoke our function, which is then going to pass that event callback just to our event handlers that actually care about it. So anytime our cookies change, this is going to be invoked. So let's save this out and see this in full effect. We obviously want to go to our application, clear out our local storage, which will then clear it out in our other tab. So would you like a cookie? We'll click yes. You can now see that we have in our console our storage event. If we were to jump and go into another tab and say local storage.set item we can pass in X and pass in Y. This is obviously going to invoke a storage change. You can see that this is still our cookies key. We do not get any alerts that something has changed because it's not relevant to what we're asking. We're asking specifically for this cookies change event. So at this point in time, it might be that you've got some data in different tabs or different UI perhaps that you need to then respond to. So if the user has multiple tabs open, and this is a very specific use case, of course, but I'm just giving you the full local storage APIs. So let's say there's something in this tab where we've clicked done on perhaps a to-do item, but then the user goes back and then all of a sudden they see the same data. So this would allow us to detect those changes that have happened in a different tab and then respond to them accordingly, which I think is a really nice API. It's quite simple and it just allows us to go and pluck out that item that we actually want to listen to based on the storage event bound to the window object.